Take a deep breath, and let's hear a story about Georgia, a skilled sailor who embarked on a solo voyage across the ocean. Georgia stood on the deck of her sailboat, the Serenity, feeling the gentle caress of the morning breeze against her sun-kissed skin. At 45, she had finally embraced her lifelong dream of sailing solo across the Atlantic, leaving behind the comfortable predictability of her life as a marine biologist. The wooden deck beneath her bare feet felt warm and reassuring, like an old friend promising to carry her safely through the journey ahead. The soft creaking of the boat's timber frame created a soothing rhythm that matched her calm, steady heartbeat. The vast expanse of blue stretched endlessly before her, merging with the horizon in a seamless watercolor painting of tranquility. Georgia inhaled deeply, filling her lungs with the salty ocean air that tasted of freedom and possibility. Her cabin was small but thoughtfully arranged, with every item finding its perfect place in the limited space. Soft morning light filtered through the small, round window, casting golden patterns that danced across her carefully folded maps and journals. Each morning, Georgia welcomed the day with a ritual of gratitude, whispering thanks to the ocean for carrying her, to the wind for guiding her, and to herself for finding the courage to embark on this journey. The gentle rocking of the boat had become as natural to her as breathing, lulling her into peaceful sleep each night and gently awakening her with the first light of dawn. She had learned to listen to the ocean's many voices, the playful splashing of waves against the hull, the distant calls of seabirds, and the whispered secrets of the wind through her sails. Georgia's provisions were simple but nourishing. Fresh fruits stored carefully in the small cooler, hearty grains and legumes in sealed containers, and a special tin of aromatic tea leaves gifted by her grandmother before she departed. Each meal was a mindful celebration of sustenance, eaten slowly as she savored both the flavors and the privilege of this solitary adventure. The small kitchen area was equipped with just the essentials, yet Georgia found unexpected joy in preparing meals that filled her small living space with comforting aromas. The navigation equipment hummed softly in the background, a gentle reminder of the technology that connected her to the world beyond her wooden sanctuary. Georgia had learned to trust both her sophisticated GPS system and her intuitive understanding of the stars, finding balance between modern navigation and ancient wisdom. Her logbook, bound in soft leather worn smooth by constant handling, contained not only coordinates and weather observations, but also her innermost thoughts and watercolor sketches of particularly beautiful sunsets. Days on the Serenity had a rhythmic quality that Georgia had come to cherish, a natural flow of tasks and contemplation that felt both productive and peaceful. Morning hours were dedicated to checking equipment, adjusting sails according to the day's wind forecast, and plotting her course with meticulous attention to detail. The afternoons often found her reading from her collection of beloved books, their pages slightly curled from the constant sea moisture, or writing long, reflective entries in her journal. When the sun began its descent, painting the sky in magnificent strokes of orange and pink, Georgia would sit on the deck with her mug of tea, watching the spectacle with childlike wonder. These sunset moments became precious pockets of profound gratitude, where the boundary between herself and the vast ocean seemed to dissolve into something greater. The evening air would grow cooler, carrying the sweet scent of salt and possibility as stars began to appear one by one in the darkening canvas above. George's hands, once soft and manicured, had transformed during her weeks at sea, developing calluses and strength that spoke of her newfound self-reliance. She had learned to make minor repairs, to read the changing moods of the ocean through subtle shifts in color and wave patterns, and to find comfort in her own company. Her long chestnut hair, streaked with strands of silver that caught the sunlight, was often braided simply to keep it from tangling in the persistent sea breeze. The Serenity carried not only Georgia, but also carefully chosen mementos from her life on land. A small shell collection arranged on a tiny shelf, photographs of loved ones tucked safely in waterproof pouches, and a hand-knitted blanket that smelled faintly of home. These treasures created a bridge between her past and present, reminding her that this journey was not an escape, but an extension of her life's path. At night, wrapped in that familiar blanket, she would drift to sleep with the gentle soundtrack of water lapping against the hull. Wildlife encounters became precious gifts that Georgia documented meticulously in her journal with both words and sketches. Dolphins would sometimes accompany the Serenity for hours, their playful leaps and curious eyes filling Georgia with childlike delight and a sense of blessed companionship. Seabirds would occasionally rest on her mast, their unexpected presence a reminder that even in this vast emptiness, life found ways to connect and share moments of existence. The rhythm of maintaining the sails became a moving meditation for Georgia, her body learning the precise tension needed for optimal speed and stability. Her muscles developed a memory for these movements, the pulling of ropes, the securing of knots, the gentle adjustments that kept the Serenity in harmony with the wind's changing moods. These repetitive physical tasks grounded her in the present moment, creating a peaceful flow state where time seemed to expand and contract according to its own mysterious rules. As the days blended together, Georgia noticed subtle changes in herself, a deepening patience, a more profound appreciation for simplicity, and a gentle softening of the anxieties that had once cluttered her mind. The endless horizon had a way of putting life's challenges into perspective, making space for clarity and calm reflection. Her thoughts moved with the same unhurried rhythm as the ocean itself, rising and falling naturally without the artificial urgency that had characterized her life on land. The radio provided Georgia's only connection to human voices, a link she used sparingly but gratefully when the silence became too expansive. These brief conversations with other sailors or coastal stations were like precious gems in the fabric of her solitary existence, reminding her of the community that awaited her eventual return. After these exchanges, she would often find herself smiling for hours, carrying the warmth of human connection as she went about her daily tasks. Georgia had planned this journey for years, poring over maritime charts, studying weather patterns, and gradually acquiring the skills needed for solo navigation. Now, living the reality of her dream, she found it both more challenging and more rewarding than she had imagined. Each successful day at sea was a testament to her careful preparation and growing adaptability, building a quiet confidence that radiated from within. As she checked her coordinates on this particular morning, a sense of accomplishment washed over her. She was exactly where she had planned to be, right on schedule. The destination that awaited Georgia was not just a physical harbor, but the culmination of a deeply personal quest for self-discovery and connection with the natural world. In her previous life, surrounded by the noise and demands of modern existence, she had sometimes felt like a visitor in her own story. Now, with each nautical mile behind her, Georgia was writing her narrative with intention and presence, becoming fully herself in the embrace of the vast, unforgiving, yet ultimately nurturing ocean. The first hints of changing weather appeared subtly, a slight drop in temperature, a shift in the quality of light, and seabirds flying lower than usual across the increasingly textured surface of the water. Georgia recognized these signs from her years of studying marine ecosystems, feeling a flutter of concern as she consulted her barometer and weather radio. The familiar voice crackled through with the forecast. A significant storm system was developing and would likely cross her path within 24 hours. Georgia moved with calm efficiency, securing loose items in the cabin and checking that everything on deck was properly fastened or stored away. Her hands worked methodically, tying knots with practiced precision, while her mind calculated routes and possibilities. The preparation itself was a form of meditation, each completed task adding to her sense of readiness and reducing the flutter of anxiety that had begun to stir in her chest. The ocean's mood shifted gradually throughout the day, its once gentle swells growing more pronounced and the soft blue darkening to a deep, steely gray. Georgia adjusted her sails accordingly, reducing their surface area to prepare for the stronger winds ahead. The Serenity responded to her touch like a trusted dance partner, settling into a more conservative stance that sacrificed some speed for much-needed stability. As evening approached, the sunset was unlike any Georgia had witnessed during her journey, a dramatic canvas of deep purples and fiery oranges that seemed to set the entire horizon ablaze. Rather than her usual deck observation, she watched this spectacle through her cabin window while completing her storm preparations. There was a solemn beauty in this dramatic sky, a reminder of nature's awesome power and unpredictability that filled Georgia with both respect and a quiet determination. Georgia had prepared a simple but hearty stew earlier in the day, knowing that cooking might become impossible as the sea grew rougher. Now she sat in her secure cabin, savoring each spoonful of the warm, nourishing meal while making final notes in her logbook. The familiar flavors provided comfort as she documented her coordinates, the changing weather patterns, and her preparation strategies with the same detailed precision that characterized all her entries. Sleep came in brief intervals that night, as Georgia alternated between rest and vigilant checks of her navigation equipment and the deteriorating conditions outside. The boat's movements had changed from a gentle rocking to more pronounced pitching that required her to brace herself when moving around the cabin. Yet even in these tense hours of waiting, she found moments to practice deep breathing, focusing on the steady rhythm of inhale and exhale to center herself amidst the growing chaos. The storm arrived in earnest during the early hours before dawn, announcing itself with rain that pelted the deck like countless tiny drummers and winds that howled through the rigging with increasing intensity. Georgia had donned her foul weather gear, the bright yellow waterproof jacket and pants feeling like armor as she made necessary adjustments to keep the Serenity stable. The familiar boat now moved differently beneath her feet, responding to the powerful forces of nature with creaks and groans that spoke of strain but not surrender. Waves began to tower above the Serenity, massive walls of water that lifted the boat high before sending it sliding down into deep troughs that momentarily blocked all view of the horizon. Georgia had secured herself with safety lines that allowed limited movement on deck when absolutely necessary, but she spent most of her time in the relative shelter of the cabin, navigating by instruments and instinct. The world outside had transformed into a monochrome palette of grays and whites, the boundaries between sky and sea blurred by sheets of driving rain. Georgia's training had prepared her for storms, but the abstract knowledge from books and courses now transformed into visceral, lived experience as the Serenity battled through the tempest. Each massive wave that washed over the deck tested the boat's integrity and Georgia's resolve. Yet there was something strangely purifying in this raw encounter with nature's might. Time seemed to stretch and compress, minutes feeling like hours as Georgia maintained hypervigilance, constantly adjusting her strategy in response to the storm's changing dynamics. Despite the physical challenges and the constant alertness required, Georgia found unexpected moments of awe in the midst of the tempest. There was a humbling majesty in these unleashed elements, a reminder of her small but significant place in the vast order of things. When lightning momentarily illuminated the churning seascape, the brief glimpses of towering waves and roiling clouds engraved themselves in her memory as images of terrible beauty. The radio remained Georgia's tenuous link to the outside world, though static increasingly interrupted the transmissions as the storm intensified. She had reported her position and situation to the nearest Coast Guard station, a precautionary measure rather than a distress call. The professional voice on the other end had offered reassurance and advised on the storm's projected path, information that Georgia integrated into her navigation strategy with calm focus. Hour by hour, Georgia and the Serenity endured, sometimes making progress along their intended route, other times simply maintaining position against the storm's relentless push. The physical demands were considerable. Georgia had to brace constantly against the boat's unpredictable movements, her muscles growing tired but her determination remaining undiminished. She fueled herself with energy bars and sips of water, knowing that maintaining her strength was as crucial as any technical sailing knowledge. The storm reached its peak intensity during what Georgia estimated was mid-afternoon, though the sky remained so dark that time had become an abstract concept, tracked only by her watch and navigation instruments. A particularly massive wave crashed over the Serenity, momentarily submerging the deck and sending a cascade of water through a small hatch that hadn't been completely secured. Georgia moved quickly to address this new challenge, bailing water from the cabin while checking for any damage to her essential equipment. Throughout the long hours of the storm, Georgia maintained an internal dialogue of calm reassurance, drawing on deep reserves of mental resilience she had cultivated through years of meditation practice. She spoke occasionally to the Serenity itself, words of encouragement that might have seemed foolish on land, but felt entirely natural in this intimate partnership between sailor and vessel. "We've got this, old girl," she would murmur as they crested another massive wave, the words carrying as much conviction for herself as for the boat. By evening, though only her instruments confirmed the time of day, subtle signs began to appear that the worst of the storm was passing. The wind's howl gradually diminished to a strong but manageable blow, and the intervals between massive waves lengthened, allowing both Georgia and the Serenity brief periods of recovery. Rain continued to fall heavily, but the violent pitching of the boat eased enough that Georgia could move more freely around the cabin, taking stock of their situation with growing optimism. As exhaustion settled deep into her bones, Georgia allowed herself a moment of profound gratitude for the sturdy construction of the Serenity, for her own preparation and training, and for the mysterious forces that had carried them through the tempest. She peeled off her salt-crusted foul-weather gear, wiped her face with a damp cloth that felt luxuriously refreshing, and permitted herself a small celebration in the form of a piece of chocolate she had been saving for a special occasion. The rich sweetness melting on her tongue became a sensory anchor to normalcy and pleasure amid the aftermath of chaos. Dawn broke with gentle insistence, rays of golden light penetrating the dissipating cloud cover and illuminating a transformed seascape that stretched before Georgia's weary but wonder-filled eyes. The storm had finally passed during the night, leaving behind a sea that still carried its memory in rolling swells but had lost the violent rage of the previous day. Standing on the deck of the Serenity, which had weathered the tempest with remarkable resilience, Georgia raised her face to the warming sunlight and allowed tears of relief and gratitude to mingle with the residual raindrops on her cheeks. The damage assessment revealed minor issues, some fraying of the secondary sail, a few items displaced in the cabin despite her careful preparations, and the expected collection of seawater in various nooks and crannies. Nothing that couldn't be managed with the tools and supplies she had on board. Georgia set about these repairs methodically, each completed task adding to her growing sense of triumph over adversity and deepening her bond with the faithful vessel that had carried her through the storm. With the navigation equipment confirmed operational, Georgia plotted their position and made a discovery that elicited a laugh of surprised delight. The storm's powerful currents had actually advanced their journey, pushing the Serenity closer to their destination than anticipated. The wind now blew steady and favorable, allowing her to set a course that would bring them to harbor within 2 days if conditions remained consistent. This unexpected gift from the tempest felt like a personal acknowledgement of her perseverance, nature's nod of respect to a worthy adversary. As the day progressed, wildlife began to reappear around the Serenity. First seabirds skimming the wave tops with renewed exuberance. Then a pod of dolphins that seemed to celebrate the storm's passing with particularly acrobatic leaps alongside the boat. Georgia watched them with childlike delight, their playful presence a confirmation that the natural world was returning to its balanced rhythm. She sketched their forms in her journal, the act of drawing a meditation that connected her even more deeply to this moment of restoration and joy. The physical toll of the storm became apparent as Georgia moved about the deck, muscles protesting with each step, hands bearing new blisters beneath her sailing gloves. Yet there was pride in this soreness, a bodily record of her capacity to endure and adapt. She treated herself to a more elaborate meal than usual, rehydrating a pouch of her favorite curry and preparing fresh rice to accompany it, the spicy aromas filling the cabin and creating a celebration for her senses after the deprivations of the storm. That evening, the sunset offered a spectacle of such extraordinary beauty that Georgia found herself wordlessly absorbing its magnificence, unable to capture it even in her journal's pages. Layers of rose gold and amber stretched across the horizon, reflected in a sea now calm enough to mirror the sky's artistry with perfect clarity. The warm colors seemed to heal something deep within her, washing away the residual tension of the storm and replacing it with a profound sense of peace and accomplishment that radiated through her tired body. Dreams came easily that night as Georgia slept more deeply than she had in days, her body surrendering to exhaustion while her unconscious mind processed the experience through gentle waves of imagery rather than the nightmares she might have expected. She woke feeling remarkably refreshed, greeting the new day with a renewed appreciation for the simple miracle of sunrise over calm waters. Her morning routine of stretching on the deck became a grateful celebration of movement, each pose an expression of thankfulness for her body's strength and resilience. Georgia had always maintained a detailed logbook, but her entry about the storm became something more, a narrative that flowed from her pen with surprising eloquence, capturing not just the technical aspects of weather navigation, but the emotional and spiritual dimensions of her experience. Writing became a form of integration, helping her make meaning from the intense challenge she had overcome. The pages filled with reflections on courage, surrender, partnership with nature, and the profound simplicity that emerges when existence is distilled to its most essential elements. The following day brought the first sighting of her destination, a distant smudge on the horizon that gradually resolved into the outline of an island, its green peaks rising invitingly from the azure sea. Georgia felt a complex mixture of emotions as the distance slowly decreased: excitement to reach her goal, pride in the successful crossing, and a surprising touch of melancholy at the thought of ending this transformative journey. She spent extra time on the bow that afternoon, savoring these final hours of open water sailing with all her senses fully engaged. Wildlife sightings increased as the Serenity approached land. Different species of birds circling with curious glances, flying fish skimming across the surface in silvery arcs, and once, breathtakingly, the distant spout of a whale that Georgia tracked through her binoculars with reverent attention. These encounters felt like welcomes, the island's ecosystem reaching out to acknowledge her arrival after the long and challenging crossing. She documented each sighting in her journal, creating a record of this transition from the deep ocean to coastal waters. Georgia had researched the harbor extensively before her journey, studying maps and approach recommendations, but the reality of navigating toward it carried an exhilaration that no preparation could fully anticipate. As the island grew larger and its features more distinct, she made careful adjustments to her course, balancing the technical requirements of a safe approach with a mindful presence that allowed her to fully experience this culmination of her journey. The radio crackled with the harbor master's voice, providing local conditions and berthing instructions that grounded her in the practicalities ahead. By late afternoon, the details of the harbor came into view: the protective arms of its jetties, the colorful collection of boats already moored within its shelter, and the small town rising from the shoreline with buildings painted in warm Mediterranean hues. Georgia prepared the Serenity for arrival, organizing docking lines and fenders while maintaining her focus on the final navigation challenges. The shift from open sea sailing to harbor approach required a different quality of attention, more precise and responsive to the closer quarters and potential hazards. The moment of arrival carried a ceremonial quality as Georgia guided the Serenity through the harbor entrance, past the acknowledging waves of other sailors, and toward the berth that had been allocated by the harbor master. The engine, used sparingly throughout her journey but essential for precise maneuvering in port, hummed steadily as she made the final approach. With practiced skill that belied the enormity of what she had accomplished, Georgia secured the Serenity to the dock, the solid thump of the fenders against the pier signaling the completion of her ocean crossing. Standing on solid ground for the first time in weeks, Georgia experienced a curious sensation. The land seemed to gently sway beneath her feet, her body still calibrated to the constant motion of the sea. This land sickness, the inverse of seasickness, brought a smile to her face as she made her way slowly toward the harbor office to complete arrival formalities. The smell of land, earth, vegetation, cooking food from nearby restaurants created a rich sensory tapestry that reminded her of the diverse experiences awaiting her exploration. That evening, Georgia sat at a small harborside cafe, savoring a meal she hadn't prepared herself and watching the Serenity gently rocking at its mooring, silhouetted against the sunset. The achievement of reaching her destination after facing and overcoming the storm had created a quiet confidence that radiated from within, noticeable to those who engaged her in conversation. Fellow sailors stopped to exchange greetings and brief stories, recognizing in her the particular glow of someone who had tested herself against the sea and emerged successful. As night fell over the harbor, bringing with it a canopy of stars that seemed both familiar and somehow different when viewed from land, Georgia reflected on the circular nature of journeys, how endings become beginnings, how destinations transform into departure points for new adventures. The storm that had tested her so severely now existed as a precious catalyst for growth, a chapter in her continuing story rather than a conclusion. With this understanding settling comfortably in her heart, Georgia raised her glass in a silent toast to the sea, to the faithful Serenity, and to the unlimited horizons that still awaited her exploration.